Hello Philosophy 12 students. I am making this video to help you do homework number 6. So there might be a little bit of a difficulty understanding exactly what to do here because in the video that I did for the truth functions I didn't do an example problem here. So what I have here are two problems. This one here, the first one is actually your number 1 in your homework. And then this one here is one that I made up that's a bit more complex. So the directions here are to determine the truth value, and it's to determine the truth value of that whole complex statement. So we are told that the values of A, B, and C are true, and we are told that the values of X, Y, and Z are false. Well, for both of these here, you could ignore B and C and Y and C. You'll need them for some other exercises, but here we could just totally ignore them. We could just focus on A and X. Okay, well, basically what we're going to do here is eventually compute the truth value of the whole statement or the whole proposition. These are complex statements or complex propositions. And so what we're doing here is determining the truth value for the whole thing. So what we do is we start assigning the values that we know, that we are given. So we know that A is true, and we know that X is false, right? So we could put a T and an F. Under the A, we put the T, and under the X, we put the F. Now we are left with the conjunction here. Remember, this statement is a conjunction. We have the dot there. And so we basically have to find out which one of the scenarios do we have a T and an F, which is basically over here on the truth table template here. Basically, since we're looking at conjunction, we're only looking at so we can focus on it. And so all I have to do is find the row in which basically P is true and Q is false, because that's the scenario that we have here, right? Well, then that would be the second row here under the P and the Q. So let me highlight that. Technically it's the fourth row for the whole thing, but it's the second one under the P and the Q. The first one is the T and T. So when P is true and Q is false, the whole thing ends up being false, right? And that's exactly the scenario that we have here. We have T and F, and so the answer for this is false. Okay, the whole answer is false, and that's what we were trying to compute. There is a main operator here, and that's the dot, and that's in this case it's the only operator, so it's the main operator by default in a way, because it's the only one. But there are some cases in which, there are a lot of cases in which you'll need to know what the main operator is. Let's look at an example like that. So let's do the the next one here, the last one here. Okay, so again, we're doing a very similar thing here, except this one is more complex. Here we do need to know that the main operator is that negation outside of the whole statement. How do I know that that's the main operator? Well, because that's the one that ranges over the whole statement. Right? It applies to the whole statement inside the parentheses. And so basically a definition for a main operator is that it's whatever operator ranges or covers over the whole statement. And that's what that negation does outside. In this case, if you want to think of it analogous to a problem in algebra or an expression in algebra where you have a negation side outside of a parentheses, and then you have all these other variables and I think they're called expressions, where that negation applies to all of them. This is very much the same kind of thing. We have the negation outside, and it applies to the whole thing, so that's our main operator. Okay, so now we proceed by doing what we did with the first problem here, the same kind of thing. We apply the T under the A, and we apply the F under the X, because we know that the A is true and we know that the X is false. Now we have to compute whatever value we come up with inside the parentheses. So remember, because the negation applies to the whole statement, we cannot compute that negation, the one that's outside, unless we know what's inside, right? Because it's going to apply to that. Well, there will only be one value inside the whole parentheses, and we have to figure what that is. Right now we haven't figured that out. We only know that A is true and X is false, right? So we need to do that. Okay, notice then that our next step is to find out what that value will be for that whole conditional statement. Remember, these are the horseshoe statements are called conditional statements. and there are parts to them. The first one is the antecedent, which is that there. That's the negation of A is the antecedent, and then other one here is called the consequent. Okay, well we need to basically compute that conditional. We cannot do that unless we have the value for the antecedent first, right? Well, the value for the antecedent is whatever we have under the tilde, right? Okay, well we have we have true under the A, so the tilde has to apply to that true, right? So basically, that means that for the antecedent we're going to have false, and that's what's going to go under that tilde in that antecedent. And then the one on the for the consequent remains unchanged. That there's no tilde there, so that just stays as F. Let me highlight the two parts here for this conditional. Okay, so inside the parentheses we're basically dealing with if false then false, right? Antecedent is false, consequent is false. Well, now we have to look at the implication part of the template here, which is this here, and because that's what we're applying, right? This is a conditional statement. It's an implication, and we have to look for the case in which both the antecedent and the consequent are false. That's where the P and the Q are false, right? And that happens to be this last row here, where they're both false. So let me highlight that last row. And so now we have to ask ourselves, okay, in that scenario where the P is false and the Q is false, what is the whole thing? And the answer is right here. The whole thing ends up being true, right? That's just what that truth value is for that one, right? So that means that inside the parentheses, the truth value will be true. So it will be just a T. Okay, but now remember, we're not done. We have to apply that main operator, which is the negation, which is outside the parentheses. And so if we apply that, then everything ends up being false, right? So the final answer here is false. And that's all you need to write as a final answer. So that is it for how to do homework number 6.